Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas, and you can read all about it on tertiumquids.org. Busy show. In a little while, we're going to visit with Victor Davis Hanson, and his new book, The Case for Trump, is going to join us. But if you hadn't noticed, there seems to be a lot in the press about this mass Republican defections. Retirements abound. There are plenty of retirements amongst the Democrats as well, and it's something to cover. But moreover, some has been made about the timing of some of the Republican Party members of the Virginia General Assembly's timing of their announcements. And we have with us one of the folks running for the Senate seat held up until this session and technically until January by Bill Carrico, is Ken Heath. Ken, welcome to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing, sir?
Very good, Joe. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, we appreciate anyone who stands up to represent their communities, and it is becoming harder and harder, especially in this post-Trump era where it seems like if you don't go along with and I can't even call it the majority think, but that what the media and those that are considered the deep thinkers of a community think of you, they can engage in character assassination and sometimes, even physical threats and protestations, all designed, I think, with a narrative to don't you run for insert representative office here, school board, city council, House of Delegates, state senate, you name it, because look at what we did to Ed Gillespie. If we can do this to Ed Gillespie, we can do it to you. It seems to be the subtext of what I hear. So anytime anyone takes the courage and steps into the arena for it, we applaud them no matter what. Ken, so yours is a similar story to several other House districts where the announcement of the office holder not running for re-election was going to come pretty close to the filing deadline. Tell us a little bit about how you come to be running for Bill Carrico's seat.
Sure, Joe. I'd be happy to. And it's interesting you mentioned in your narrative about the way things are kind of put out there for folks to be discouraged from running. And that's just opposite of what I have always believed in. I'm lucky enough to be elected twice to our town council here several years ago, and have always served in some form or another, volunteer firefighter for a number of years, to be able to give back to the community because I believe in that. And that is truly the pureness of heart of what I wanted to do, is to be able to serve my community, to be able to serve not only Marion and Smith County, but the entire 40th, and rural Virginia, and have a voice in Richmond, because I don't think that voice is heard loud enough. And the way it happened for me is I have always had an interest in politics. Big fan of Ronald Reagan, just admire the guy. There's a huge poster right beside my desk, matter of fact. But also, and love the charm that Barack Obama with his speaking brought, well, whether I agree on policies or not. So I've always been involved in that arena. And had talked with both our member of House of Delegates and our senator on a number of occasions, and indicated to them that I was interested in sometime in my lifetime of having the opportunity to put my name forward to see if the voters would want to have me serve them in a higher office, and realizing that you have 2 state and 2 federal offices that you really have an opportunity to run for, and realizing that generally speaking, folks get in there for life. I'm 56, and like to think I have several good years ahead of me. But I'm certainly on the shorter side of the calendar than I was 20 years ago. So made my intentions known on several occasions to all the delegation here in Southwest Virginia. Just finished the Sorensen Institute for Political Leadership last year. So really geared it up when we went up and talked to them in January. And at the time, everybody was on the same page because of the thin majority between the Republicans and the Democrats in the House and the Senate for Virginia. They were all going to run again so they could maintain, and I get that. And I had always pledged to both those guys, the entire Southwest delegation, that I promised I would never run against an incumbent. And that's not all completely out of benevolence, to be honest with you. It's really tough to beat an incumbent with a war chest and the power and things. And, they're doing a good job for us, so I'm happy to sit back and and let them continue governing for us, and I'll do what I'm doing here in Southwest Virginia on my own, going out to communities and doing small-town revitalization on my own, and I'm cool with that. Well, I happened to be in the office one day and got a call, didn't recognize the number, and in addition to the work that I do with the town of Marion, I also have a side business, and this call came on my cell phone, didn't recognize the number, and to be honest with you, I thought it was a robocall, so I waited a little bit to call back. And just happened by fate, at 11:30, called the number back. And this nice lady said that there was a group that had been talking and asking if I'd be interested in running for Senator Carrico's seat. And I know there's been a lot of controversy because the senator was one of the patrons for the I-81 toll bill, and a lot of people are really upset about that.
Yes.
And I told the lady, I said, I'm really honored. I've had a lot of people ask me if I would run against him specifically because of the 81 toll bill and the speed camera bill. But I'm not interested in challenging. I've made my vow, and I promised that I wouldn't do that, and I'm going to hold good to my word. And she said, well, the thing is, he's retiring at the end of the session. I said, well, then absolutely I'd be interested. He didn't say anything to me about it. This must be fairly sudden. And she said, well, the bad thing is the retirement is going to be announced at the exact time that the time expires for you to put in. And
wow.
I said, well, thank you very much. Hang on. So I hung up the phone, and I called our registrar of voters. And, of course, it's a party thing, so she didn't know the answer. So I called our party chairman for the Smith County, and he referred me to the 40th District chairman. And through a series of phone calls, the clock's ticking, and finally got the word that, yes, that it's not official, but all indication was that Senator Carrico was going to announce his retirement at noon, and noon was the deadline. And so I asked the gentleman, I said, can I text or email you my intention and my declaration to run? And he said, no, it has to be hand-delivered.
Oh, boy.
And to be honest with you, Joe, he was giving me directions, and it was a little slower than I had patience for. So I said, tell you what, give me a street address. I'll plug it in my phone and take off. And the catchphrase was at that point, hold my Mountain Dew, I'm on my way. And literally jumped in my truck. And to be honest with you, I tried calling my wife on the way down there, and she didn't answer her phone. So she didn't know I was running for Senate until her boss went up to her in a meeting and handed her the phone and said, did you know your husband's running for Senate? So I had some, as Ricky Ricardo would have to say, I had some splaining to do when I got home.
Yeah. By the way, honey, guess how my day went?
Exactly. And you know, I literally got my paperwork up there. I had a card that I keep beside my desk, some personal cards that I write some notes on, and wrote on there, I hereby declare my intention to run for Senate 40. And took it down there and gave it to our 40th District Chairman, Paul Grinstead, literally handed it to him with 2 minutes to spare. So,
wow.
Got in right under the buzzer.
Now, the interesting thing is that in this story, and I'm catching up on it, this is remarkably similar to what happened here in the 25th House District with Delegate Steve Landis, who announced he was going to run for clerk of courts and then wouldn't be seeking re-election. It also was breaking just before the deadline to file. We were able to catch it, get it on the air, and two gentlemen such as yourself stepped forward along with somebody who seemed to already be aware of the retirement. In this case, it is Delegate Pillion seemed to be aware of the retirement pending and was ready to file or had filed already. And this is the kind of stuff that I think leads those of us who are only catching this on the radio to really get our blood pressure on edge. Ken?
Well, Joe, and to be honest with you, it did mine as well. You know, my father was a disabled vet. I work with our veterans groups here. We're getting a big Memorial Day planned here. And these guys and women have fought for the right for everybody to have a shot. When I grew up, I was told, if you want to grow up to be president, you can. Nobody told me, except somebody may not let you know that you can do that. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm one of those kind of guys where it's really tough for me. Somebody tell me you can't do it, and I didn't know any of the sequence of the timing of events, other than what I just told you, until our senator went on TV and told that he had let his family, his friends, the Republican senatorial leadership in Richmond, and Dr. Pillion know on Friday, the Friday before Tuesday, that he was retiring. So Delegate Pillion had plenty of time to get his things in. The thing that bothers me most about this is I don't know that Delegate Pillion or I am the best candidate overall at all.
Right.
There may have been somebody else out there that could have been even better. I know there's a group of evangelicals down in Bristol that are really opposed to the casino. Both Delegate Pillion and I are both for the casino, from what I've gathered from him, and certainly I am, because it's a private venture, a separate issue. But they need to have a voice in this race, somebody that will listen to them and represent them on that particular issue, because it's so important to them, and they didn't have that opportunity. How many other people did we deny the opportunity? And again, the senator can announce any time or doesn't have to announce, and he was very clear about that he had no legal obligation to tell anybody that he was retiring. I get that, but it's really tough if you want to have a party that grows, if you want to have representative democracy. If you're telling this guy, listen, I'm going to retire, go ahead and get your paperwork in, and I'm going to give you my endorsement exactly when it happens, and we're going to time it so that nobody else knows it's going to happen, that makes it really tough and shuts down the field, and it does. It gets my blood boiling just as it does yours.
I'm going to play devil's advocate for just a little bit here, because I was told, because I was a fairly vocal opponent of this, and I am friends with Steve Landis, and I like the way Steve represented the 25th House District. I was told by friends of friends that I was wrong, that in this post-Bloomberg world where we see how much money he's poured into House elections, that we really need to be more careful and coordinate this, because otherwise we could, and it's very fragile, and so on and so on, all this stuff. Who cares? We're supposedly the party of free markets and free enterprise. Competition, as far as I can tell, makes us all better, makes us better candidate. The race for this 40th Senate District nomination, it's going to be a mass meeting in and around the 40th for this in Smith County, correct?
Well, actually, yes. It's a mass meeting and this is the really thing, Joe, that the other part, and we talk about voter suppression, and I have always argued that we as Republicans don't do that we are out here and we are wanting as many people as we can get. And, every time I go up and talk to high school kids, I always encourage them to get registered to vote as soon as they turn 18. And matter of fact, when I was on council, encourage them to run against me, because I believe in the political process and I want to win. Make no mistake, but I want to win fairly, and I want to win because my ideals are supported by more people, not because I have set up anything. Now, that being said, this mass meeting, and yes, and they'll tell you that the 40th mass meeting has always been on a Thursday night in Gate City, but they won't tell you that it has never been challenged. There's never been a challenger. It's always been William Wampler, and then after William Wampler stepped down and Bill Carrico had it, there's only been one person. So there's not been anything but pomp and circumstance and a coronation, more or less, to do that. And that's cool if you don't have, if you certainly don't have to spend the money. But now that there's a challenge, we actually asked if it could be moved to a Saturday to give more people time to participate, or it's in Gate City now, which is in not the furthest west in Southwest Virginia, but pretty close. Matter of fact, you can get to Gate City from Knoxville, Tennessee, quicker than you can from some of the areas in their district.
Wow.
So we asked to move it to Bristol, which would be a little more centrally located. And both those were pretty much categorically denied. In the other House races, they're doing a primary, and of course they waited until the time had expired to roll this into a primary, but it really sets it up. So the other thing, in my real world job here in town, I have worked with small businesses all my life to get people to opportunity to shop, to have businesses, to have jobs, those kind of things. And what I'm having to do are ask my supporters in the outlying areas to take off a half day of work, to close their shops, to drive to Gate City. And I understand it's not a short process, and I can't tell you for sure what that process is because I have yet to be able to get an agenda, how many folks get to speak, what the process is. I don't have any of that information. And here we are 2 weeks out. So I'm asking people to go down, and it may be 10 or 11 o'clock when they get out, so they may not open up the next day. So I'm fighting a real challenge in myself. How do I, as a practitioner of an economic development that have begged people to open up stores and help them open up stores to create opportunity, tell them now, if you want me as your senator, you're going to have to close your store, have your people not come in for work, to come down here to vote for me, because the only way to do it is to be down in Gate City at 5:30 on a Thursday night. I don't know what the capacity of the building is. I don't know what the provisions are, if it's overflow. I don't know whether they're going to, there's been talk that there's a provision. It may not be one person, one vote. It may be proportioned out by apportionment. So there's a lot of unanswered questions that just our ninth district chairman, our Smith County GOP guy, Adam Tolbert, has been great with information. But this is a 40th district kind of thing, and I would expected that you would have some kind of a meeting with the two challengers to say, hey, just to let you know, you each get three people to speak, and we're going to give you a deck of cards, and you go back in the back room and play, and whoever wins, or whatever the procedure is.
Rock, paper, scissors. But know what the rules are.
A wrestling match, whatever you want to do.
All right, so
you kind of need to have an idea of what we're going into, because I don't want folks coming down to vote for me. They get down there, they sign a pledge, they're going to support whichever challenger wins, and then they get in there and they find out that it's a different system than they thought. And they're going to be down there half the night, and they come and they vote and they leave and they go, oh, we're going to have a revote, and my people have left because they've got to come back home. I mean, we have people, we have strong support over the coal fields, we have strong support right there in Scott County, but we also have a pool of support in Wythe County, Washington County, Grayson County, here in Smith County. That's a considerable drive from that area, and there's just no consideration for the people who don't live in that immediate area. And, it's a Thursday night in April. Folks will be wanting to tend to their gardens. There's a lot of things you can be doing on a Thursday night after getting off work.
Oh, sure.
Other than sitting in a room all night.
Ken Heath is on with us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. So talk about the economic development side of this, because to me, if I'm looking at two people, whether one's been in the House of Delegates for years or not, you work rolled up sleeves on the ground on economic development. You said in Marion, correct?
In Marion, but the thing is, Joe, not only do we do it here in Marion, we do it all over Southwest Virginia. We're going to Bluefield Thursday to help out with their program. Abingdon, we've reached out to them, and we all across Southwest Virginia. We actually had a program that I started several years ago that we didn't think our voice was being heard loud enough in Richmond. We called it the Southwest Rebellion. And we had a group of economic development, Main Street professionals, PDC folks that would get together once a year, and we'd commiserate on problems we're having, we'd share ideas, we'd steal best practices from each other, and then we'd draw a name out of a hat, we'd go to the next time, so we'd see the rest of the Commonwealth, we would see what it's like in those areas, and develop great friendships and great ideas that people are using that we have stolen from them and they've stolen from us to continue to grow Southwest Virginia. So this is not something new to me. This is something I've done for 25 years now.
Well, and that's what I think the Virginia has grown so centralized, and that we look at the Amazons and we look at these centralizations, and we don't forget about downtowns and what it means to be in these towns, whether it be Charlottesville or Roanoke or Blacksburg or Bristol or Marion. So what is it the General Assembly could do if you're in the Senate that would help? Is it regulation reform like they're doing in Washington? Hopefully the president can continue to do that. Is there tax reform that needs to happen? What in your mind would be Senator Heath's agenda regarding, helping people like you do economic development non-municipally, where, you're not waiting for the government to do tax increment financing and all this other stuff?
I can tell you, Joe, we don't wait on the government to do much here. We are the government, so we understand the process. We run our Office of Economic Development as close to a private business as legally we can. We are prospecting work years out, and we go after things. We go by the Ronald Reagan slogan, it can be done. And as opposed to the answer is no, what's the question? We're always looking for ways to make things work. And that's what I want to take to Richmond, is not only that positive can-do attitude, but the proven track record that we have been able to do that. We came up with a program back in the beginning of the Great Recession in 2008. We saw with our vacancy rate here in downtown Marion, and we're a small community of 6,000 people in Smith County, down in the far southwestern end of the state on 81. And we saw our vacancy rate in our Main Street shops shoot up to almost 18%.
Yeah.
There was a lot of despair, a lot of, and we're adjacent to the coal counties, but we aren't a coal producer. We used to be tobacco and textiles, and NAFTA really just punched us in the gut. We recovered from that somewhat. We still have some great manufacturing. About 32% of our economy is still manufacturing. But we saw that the retail piece of that, the restaurant piece of that, all these things were falling short, and people were unemployed. And I can tell you right now we're at just right around 4%, a little over 4% unemployment in Smith County. But if you don't have a job, the unemployment rate is 100%. And I get that. I have been there. So what we are working to do is to give everybody an opportunity, and we found out that there weren't enough jobs for people to go around. So we said, all right, we're still seeing people spend money, but they're spending it in Bristol and Abingdon, they're spending outside the area. So we went to the people and we said, if it were here, would you spend money here? And resoundingly they said, well, yeah, but we just don't have that opportunity. So we said, well, what things would you spend money on? And we also did a market analysis, and they matched hand in hand.
Wow.
And the things that people wanted, we went out and we marketed. And we came up with a program we called Pop-Up Marion, a small business development program that we train entrepreneurs, and we call it getting you from the couch to the cash register. We take you through a 5 or 6 week course, and we put you in the ability to clean up your credit, to start your own business, and then we give you a seed grant if you do a good enough job. We put you up in front of everybody like Shark Tank, so you have to give your presentation.
Sure.
And then we give you a $5,000 grant. But here's the catch: we don't give you a $5,000 check. If you give me a $5,000 check, I'm going to be in Gatlinburg or over in I'll be in Cherokee or somewhere this weekend. So what we do is say, here's $5,000. It's used for rent and utilities for 6 months. But here's the catch: you pay the bills, you bring the receipts to us every month. So we sit down, we look at your books, we look at your marketing, we make sure you're doing what you say you're doing,
like
and we reimburse you. Yeah. So we've trained you to pay those bills. And since we've done this, we've trained 275 people from Bristol to Bluefield that have come to our class. We've sold 11 buildings in Marion. We have 22 new store fronts filled, 30 new businesses, 118 new jobs, and spurred over $2 million in private investment in downtown in this program. And this is a small community of 6,000 people. Now, the neat thing about it is we don't keep our secrets well. We like to brag on ourselves. The good Lord has blessed us, and I'm a true believer that as blessings are given, you have to share. So we've taken this from Alta Vista to Abingdon, from Bristol to Bluefield, from South Boston to South Hill, and just got message this week that our sister community, North Carolina, Marion, North Carolina, has taken our pop-up program and has won a Governor of North Carolina award. And they sent me back a letter. Freddie Killo sent me back an email this week and said it was completely due to us coming over, teaching them the pop-up program, and giving that community hope and belief in itself. And my friend, that's the biggest thing I can bring.
Wow,
I'm a salesman for Southwest Virginia. I can help. We've been over and talked to the folks in Pound. We've been all over the district and talking to folks and saying, listen, Ronald Reagan said it best, it can be done. We just have to put a little bit of hope back in there. With a little bit of hope, it's stone soup. Everybody pitches in, and we see the successes.
Pardon me if I tend to work in a world where I'm trying to put this in perspective of things. What you've described is for business kind of almost what Habitat for Humanity does with homeownership. Finds people. It seems so brilliantly obvious. Can I almost, you want to talk about Schadenfreude, I almost don't want you to win so I can hire your company and bring you up here to Charlottesville where our flagship station is. God, we could use somebody like you up here. Ken Heath, I truly appreciate meeting you, and I still hope those ministers, the evangelical pastors, bring those votes to you just because you stood up to them. I think that would be the story of this election cycle. Not that I have anything against Delegate Pillion. You remind me so much of a dear friend of mine named Ron Farron, who I said I would vote for in the 5th Congressional District primary. He got about 15 votes in Charlottesville, and they're all personal friends of mine. And I want to find out some more after the election about this pop-up program, because it is brilliant, and I am so glad to meet you for just learning that about you this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
It's my pleasure, and I look forward to seeing people on the 40th. And however this ends up, my friend, I'll tell you, if I end up being your representative up in Richmond, that's great. I'd love to do that for you. If it doesn't, I'm still going to be here fighting for Southwest Virginia every single day. April
25th is the mass meeting. Find out more that way as well. Thank you, Ken. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, sir.
Victor Davis Hanson, it's tough to say this, and I probably wouldn't have said this at the preparation, but Victor Davis Hanson may be my second favorite guest from this week's show. He's coming up next. The Case for Trump is his new book on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio. And joining us now, very, very special guest, author of The Case for Trump. It is Victor Davis Hanson. Victor, thank you again for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing, sir?
Very good. Thank you for having me.
Not at all. Thank you for taking time. When did the impetus of this book first strike you?
Well, it was right after he got elected, because I thought there was a lot of misinformation. There was either he was a saint or a sinner, but few people just analyzed how a person without either political or military experience had defeated 16 candidates, and then how did, against all the polls and professional judgment, win the presidency against Hillary Clinton, that had all of the media and the establishment and 2.5 times more money. How did he win? And then how did he defy expectations by having a pretty good presidency for the first 2.25 years, in spite of these efforts to the Mueller investigation, the Emoluments Act allegation, the 25th Amendment, all of these efforts to destroy his presidency. And finally, what was it about him or his agenda that made people hate him so much?
Well, so
I tried to analyze that.
Is it people, or is it the people we've always sort of turned to dictate to us what our opinions need to be? The media centric, because it seemed like one of the tactics the president used, both in the campaign and now, is this avoidance of the traditional conduit of connection, his rallies, as close to a door-to-door campaign nationwide as I could imagine. These rallies often were the fulcrum of the idea of fake news, because people would go to the rally, then read about it the next day in the paper and say, that's not anything like what went on at the rally. And it started to really begin to convince people that what they were reading in the newspaper or watching on the evening news wasn't necessarily what really happened.
I think it was all of that. I think the Republican establishment, but the media establishment and the political establishment assumed that every Republican nominee, a Bob Dole, John McCain, or Mitt Romney, would act and talk and comport themselves in a way that they approved of and would have the necessary background. And when Trump came along, he was so written off that he was alienated. And then when he won, he used some of them, but he didn't call them up. He didn't call the Weekly Standard, National Review, commentary and say, hey, I need some wise men to advise me. He didn't call the Council on Foreign Relations, Brookings Institute, etc. He didn't call past presidents. Hey, Bill Clinton. Hey, George, give me some advice. And I think that bothered people. And then they couldn't square the circle that he got 3% annualized growth, record peacetime unemployment in the last 70 years, energy production, deregulation, good judges, but he had not gone to Harvard Business School, Yale Law School, Harvard Law School. He didn't speak a particular way. He didn't look a particular way. And it became for them a referendum on their own resumes. If we have the best resumes, but we didn't do as well as he did, what does that say about the value of a resume?
Does that lead them to believe that he had to have cheated to get it? I think this is part, at least in my observation, I'm really curious about yours. We're visiting with Victor Davis Hanson, the author of The Case for Trump, which is at essence to this zeal with a lot of the folks in the media that he had to have cheated. Russia had to have helped him. Foreign governments had to have helped him. He had to have, had unseen and collusive help. Because otherwise, it blows up their whole worldview if somebody can just come from outside and do this.
I think that's true, but in the book, I kind of pointed out that they didn't believe that until he won. In fact, Barack Obama gave a speech 3 weeks before the election, said you can't, even if Trump wanted to, you can't change an election. We have so many bulletproof barriers to Russian collusion, and he better quit whining. He was whining Hillary's emails. He better quit whining and go out there, because they all knew he was going to lose, they thought.
Oh, sure.
So this idea that he cheated, it only came really within 24 hours after the election. They had the Steele dossier not to destroy his presidency. They didn't think it would ever exist. They had it because they wanted to run up a landslide, a mandate, an insurance policy, leak all of these false stories to the media, which they did before the election. And then after the election, for the first time, they went back and looked at that dossier and said, you know what, now it's valuable to undermine his transition, to get 3 more FISA warrants, to unmask. In that period between November and January 20th, when Trump took over, it was just frenzied activity on the part of the Obama administration to get out as much salacious detail, to leak as much from FISA warrants, to try to demonize Michael Flynn. That's where that fury came, that he won. And then they developed this narrative that he cheated. But before he won, they didn't think he cheated at all. They thought he was a buffoon. He was too stupid, they thought, to cheat. And Clapper and Comey and McCabe and Brennan and Becky and all those people, Sally Yates, they would have all been praised by President Hillary Clinton. They would have come to her and said, you know what? We signed FISA warrants, and we didn't tell the judges that you paid for this Steele dossier. Or they would have said, we went and put an informant in Trump's campaign. Or you know what? We unmasked names of those who were surveilled and leaked them to Yahoo News. We did a lot for you. We want a better job. And that's that we would have not known any of this had we won.
You know, what's interesting about the FISA warrants, and as somebody who studies tactics, I still to this day think the FISA judge needs to be held to account in some degree, because the word judge means to me you're that line in the sand. When the Fourth Amendment was written, the whole point was you're supposed to make a case to a judge beyond a reasonable doubt, not, oh, here are two stories that we leaked to the press about this dossier that we've got here, so this becomes the proof of the dossier that we leaked to the press. And it's the judgment that was not invoked in that whole case on an essential level to the future of the Bill of Rights alone is supposed to count on people saying you didn't make your case, sorry, that doesn't work, and we're not seeing
That's a good point. And remember, in the Lisa Page Peter Strzok text corpus, there's reference to a FISA judge that they know when they feel that they need to get to know better.
Right.
And there's the implication that these FISA judges can or cannot ask questions depending on their sympathy to the people who are applying. But it's pretty crazy for me when even the redacted FISA warrants that we did get, and wait till we get the unredacted, which I think we'll get pretty soon, in which the FBI and the DOJ says that this is a product of opposition research, but the judge never asked who paid for it when there's only two possibilities. There's
right.
Trump and there's the opposition. And so they must have known it was Hillary Clinton, and yet with this wink and nod fashion, both parties never even said that it was.
Right.
And that was shocking.
We're visiting with Senior Fellow in Military History at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, Victor Davis Hanson, author of the book Case for Trump. It's on sale. You can find it at victorhanson.com. Professor, I want to talk about the president in terms of his geopolitical, and because it's so much of your milieu, you look at what he's done with Iran, China, Korea, Israel, and it seems like you're thinking about 2 years, and there's more going on in this 2 years than have really happened geopolitically in the last 15. Is there? And do you have a feeling that there's a plan here? I've heard, first you destabilize North Korea, and then that destabilizes Iran, and all of these things that seem to lynch together. Do you feel like the president's history is going to be more about what he does internationally than even what he does domestically?
It's hard to know, but I think Henry Kissinger said it best. He said a person like Trump comes along once in a while to disrupt status quo orthodoxies that needed to be disrupted. So what Trump did is he looked at the world as from a fresh view, and he said, why are we paying our contributions for NATO when these people are on the front lines and they're not paying 2%? And everybody said, you don't dare mention NATO. He did, and he got some results. Or how can you have North Korea with missiles pointed at Portland and San Diego? You can't do it. And yet that's the situation he inherited, but everything had failed before that. He looked at the Iran deal and said, this is a prescription for them to get a weapon in 10 years. We're going to get out of it. The Paris Accord, we've already met its expectations with the use of natural gas. Is a joke. We're not going to pay money and see China pollute and take advantage of our economies. And whether it was moving the embassy to Jerusalem or recognize the Golan Heights or not funneling money through the UN to the Palestinian quote-unquote refugees, he just sort of looked at the world empirically, and he said, everybody's talked about all this stuff, but they're so compromised by the status quo and they're worried about the reputation or what the media would say. I'm just going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And he did. And that bothered people. And he did the same thing, whether it was greenlighting Keystone or opening up AMLO or opening up more federal lands for natural gas exploration. He said that I'm not invested in the media. I'm not invested in the political parties. I'm not invested in what you say about me. I'm just going to do it. And he got results. And I think overseas, when you talk to foreign reporters, and we have a lot that come to the Hoover Institution, we have foreign dignitaries, it's very funny because officially they're appalled by Trump's behavior. But when you start to talk to them, they start to tell you that people abroad now know that the United States rewards its friends and punishes its enemies, and they would prefer to be friends. Whereas before, they thought there was no upside in being a friend of the United States, that Barack Obama was a globalist or an internationalist, or that he favored Iran over Israel, or he didn't really care about North Korea having overflights into Japan, or he didn't care whether Iran, hazed American ships. And they don't feel that now. They feel that it's better to be friendly with the United States than not friendly, because if you're an enemy of the United States, you pay a price.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really encouraged countries like Australia and Japan, Taiwan, South Korea to step up and say, you know what, we can stop Chinese aggression. Or some states in Europe saying it's not foreordained that China is going to push us around, or that Russia is going to take another of its former Soviet republics.
No, it's a great point. Victor Davis Hanson, I've got two questions. I don't know how quickly we can answer them, and we're under no time constraints. So, but there are two that strike me as essential to the next 2 years and perhaps the 4 after that. The president's popularity growing in the black community and in areas where traditionally the Democrats have lived. First, is that key to why they're so passionately trying to drag him down? And second part of that first question is there a lesson that the Republican/conservative people should be learning from that, in your view, from where you sit at the Hoover Institute and as somebody who's been a chronicler of these historical moments?
Yeah, I'm speaking from my farmhouse in Selma, California, San Joaquin Valley, which is mostly Hispanic neighborhood. And the change in job opportunity is amazing. And what Trump was trying to do was substitute class for race. And what I mean by that is he thought if he could get a 3% GDP and record low minority unemployment, then a job is central to a person's existence. And he could say to a person, once you're in the driver's seat and employers have to come to you rather than you have to fight other job workers, whether they're illegal or not, for a job, then you're going to have a greater sense of self, confidence, people around you are going to be happier. And a lot of these problems in the country, identity politics, animosities, crime, are going to start to wither away if we can just get you guys jobs and give you a sense that you're on the right trajectory. And he did that. And that made the Democrats very scared because they had so alienated the white working class. 62, 63, 64% of white males always vote against Democrats. And that's the white population is still 70% of the electorate. And so what he's saying to the Democratic Party is you can't afford to lose 40% of the Hispanics or 20% of the African Americans, because you have so lost people who are tired of this progressive white supremacy, white privilege, these charges that are leveled against the white working class who have no white privilege, at least compared to the people who are charging them with it, live in Malibu and Atherton and Greenwich. So I think that caused the hysteria, that Trump basically, like a proverbial fox, went into the hen house, both in the Midwest, and poached the Democratic Union worker from the Democratic Party. And then now he's starting to go into states like Colorado and Nevada that can't afford to lose 40% of the Hispanic vote. The Democrats can't. And in a state like Michigan or Virginia that have about 250,000 Hispanic voters, which he could win those states just by the Hispanic vote not being 80-90% against him.
Yeah.
That's his plan. I think it's a good plan. He needs to really double down on it.
Well, it certainly reminds me of 1984 when, it seemed, I think there was only one state that didn't vote for Reagan electorally, and it was Bob Dole's home state. Not Bob Dole. The guy.
Walter Mondale.
Walter Mondale.
Yeah.
The second question, and it has to really do with President Bush 41 more than anything else. But it has to do with Trump and his attitude towards NATO and the UN and international China, Russia, etc., is that when President Bush left office and he and Brent Scowcroft wrote The World Transformed, and it was about the New World Order and the Soviet Union had collapsed, I got the impression they were talking about a world that understood the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights and said, we want to live like that. What's transpired since then is a place where it is a planet that seems to say, okay, you had your 2-century-long flirtation with this citizen-led government. Now join the rest of us and understand that there has to be a ruling elite in order for an ordered society. And I feel like that's kind of where we are right now, as we're teetering on becoming just like all the other, global European style. The ruling elites tell the rest of the masses. I hear them talk about eliminating the Electoral College at the same time of telling us we were too dumb to identify Russian fake websites telling us to vote one way or another, and making the case that this is why New York and L.A. and Chicago should pick all our presidents. Is this a flashpoint in history where if the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, however much we still live by it today, is going to survive, we need to push back against the idea that it was a cute little experiment for a couple of hundred years, but it really is just a blip in history rather than something that really could be paradigm shifting in people's liberty?
Yeah, I think it is. I think people in Silicon Valley had more allegiance to Tokyo and Shanghai than they did Bakersfield or Fresno. And then people in Wall Street had more allegiance to London or Paris or Hamburg than they did York, Pennsylvania. And by that I mean they were trying to tell the deplorables and the irredeemables, hey, when we go abroad, we see solar panels and we see clean airports, but we don't see crazy people with guns. They don't have a Second Amendment, or they have abortion on demand. They have infanticide. They have euthanasia. They have radical government green programs that take away private property, or they don't allow referenda to be standing, or they don't really believe in the First Amendment because it encourages hate speech. So they were telling us, hey, you guys in the middle of the country, we're abroad where all the wealth and power is, and the Chinese and the EU and Japan and Korea, they have different paradigms, and it's time for us to be more like them than them like us. And one of the things, and so the middle of the country said, you know what, I don't believe in partial birth abortion. I don't believe that you can restrict free speech. I don't believe you have a right to take away my constitutionally protected firearm. I don't believe that due process and the Fifth Amendment should be banned from campus. I don't believe
private property.
That free trade is fair trade. And so, it is a pushback. And the funny thing about it is it's starting to get adherents in the Yellow Vest in France and the Brexit movement, and Eastern Europeans push back against Germany, and Southern Europeans push back against Frankfurt, Germany, and the financiers. So it's a worldwide populist pushback and says, you know what, the nation state and difference is really what protects freedom, and transnational conglomerations of bureaucrats that are unelected destroy freedom, and we don't want a part of it. And that's why they hate Trump so much, I think, especially in this country.
Yeah, and
because if he succeeds, their power will be sorely diminished.
I grew up in New York City, Professor Hanson, and I've been watching Donald Trump since the first day he walked out in front of a TV camera and said, I'd like to build a building here and hire 5,000 New Yorkers to build it. I don't know why Ed Koch isn't, with me on it, and he really is the same guy he was then as well. But I know this much: he's never been the guy everyone's warned you about. If you let Trump do this, then fill in the blank, something horrible will happen. He's never been that guy, and equally, nobody's ever gone back and said, hey, we got it wrong. All those horrible things didn't happen. So I imagine that we'll be visiting again soon with more books for you. What is next for you as you continue, or are you just going to kind of work this book for a while, or do you have anything else in mind coming?
Well, the publisher wants me to update it right before the election for the paperback, and I'll do that. But I'm also the topic that we just talked about. Mm-hmm. I'm interested in the global elite throughout history and the administrative permanent state and its role in decline and destruction of culture.
Wow.
Because I really do believe that. I think that when you get these administrative permanent bureaucracies, whether in Rome or Byzantium or here, they lose their sense of national loyalty, and they view empire as preferable to the republic, and they're very pernicious throughout history.
Yeah, I'll line up to buy the first copy of that when you're done with it, sir. I do deeply appreciate your time, and thank you so much for spending it with us. Moreover, writing the book as well, The Case for Trump. It's at victorhanson.com, Amazon, at Barnes & Noble if they haven't buried it on the cutout bin yet. But I do deeply appreciate your time, as always, and all of the books you've written. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Not at all. Like so many things, I feel 6 inches taller and a better dancer now. Thank you for listening this week. Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Until next weekend, so long, and thanks for all the fish.